Jack, good to speak with you again.
Always a pleasure, mate. How are you getting on?
Doing well. We were talking before we hit record about a little bit about Mo Salah, a little bit about avoiding the lurgy, a little bit about avoiding talking about Spurs. But here we are. We're gonna have to dive into Spurs ahead of this the game this weekend. But I'm not gonna do that yet. I'm gonna make you go back to a high point. I was actually at uh, White Hart Lane, watching one of those like viewing parties, watching the Europa League final, which turned out to be what it was, and watched, of course, sort of Spurs win, and got to see what I would say is some quite emotional scenes like around me of people who've clearly supported the club all their life, getting to sort of witness that with friends, with family. It was an emotional couple of weeks actually because I went up to Liverpool shortly afterwards for the title parade as well. So a generally wholesome kind of few weeks of seeing fans like celebrate footballing victories. But I wanted to ask you before we go into this season where your head was at really, because the season had been such a tough season in terms of the league campaign, like finishing 17th, but then finishing on that high of winning what was a forget about the actual match itself, but just winning that European trophy. Where was your head at come the end of the season?
Oh, it's just that relief, wasn't it, mate? The trophy itself was something outside of whatever was
Yeah,
going on at that point in time in the league. It was just a recognition that we can still just bloody win something because this is,
yeah,
it become this thing around our next 17 years without a trophy. And whatever anyone wants to say about Spurs, all your listeners will be Liverpool fans. And I'm sure a lot of them will know outside of the memes and stuff, Spurs have still always been a club that have won stuff. We are one of the most decorated clubs in the country. And so to go that long without having won something was unpleasant, especially given the sort of the runs we'd had in various different competitions, the amount of near misses. It started to genuinely feel like I was never going to see them win something again. And the mad thing about this is, right, it also sort of demonstrated how quickly time goes in respect to last time I saw Spurs win something in the League Cup, I was in my early 20s. I'm now 40. You know, like it's just how did that happen? But there we go, mate. As for the league, it was yeah, it was challenging. It was difficult, and it is spilling over into this season as well, which I'm sure we'll get onto. Obviously, a lot of conversations to be had about then Ange Postecoglou, now Thomas Frank. How much
mm,
of the league form lies on their shoulders? How much of it lies with the people in charge who run the club and their poor planning? It's an ongoing debate. But yeah, I can say that I've never seen Spurs as bad as they were last year in the Premier League. You know, I count my blessings, and I say this without trying to be dramatic. I count my blessings that there were three sides that were worse than us in the Premier League last year because I think people that crunched numbers at the time, there were plenty of other Premier League seasons where our final points tally would have seen us relegated, which is something I didn't think I'd see myself saying after, 5, 6 years ago, we had Maurizio Pochettino in charge and we were a team that was in with an outside chance of maybe winning a Premier League. Now, here we are. It's yes, it's pretty hard to grasp on an emotional level, but the breadcrumbs are there as to why we're in this position, I think.
yeah, and I think clinching Champions League qualification, with that win right at the end of the season, despite how kind of like disastrous at times that campaign had been. And you mentioned, I think, yeah, you're right to look at the numbers and be thankful that it was that particular season and that any prospect of relegation was avoided. But I remember end of the season, it didn't really feel like there was too much of a big divide amongst the fan base, head versus heart, in terms of people being very thankful that that Spurs had gotten over the line and won that trophy. Thankful to Ange. We can enjoy the emotion of the parade, the celebrations, the kind of jokes. Most fans I spoke to, and as someone who grew up in North London, you know, did seem to be coming down on the side of thank you very much, but we cannot have a repeat of what happened in the league season. Unfortunately, I think that needs to be maybe the end. were you in that camp of that, like, look, logically, we put everything to a side here. That season is, unacceptable. We need to move on from the manager. We'll come on to talk about the fact that, very often Spurs, when things have been going wrong in this recent era of kind of Spurs ownership, the manager is the one that moves out of the seat and gets replaced with somebody else. This time round, we're going to be talking about a situation where not only the manager went, but Daniel Levy ends up being, of course, like removed as chairman as well. And this is a completely new ownership structure for Spurs, a new era, I suppose. Um, but just on the manager itself, yeah, were you as kind of like coldly logical about it by the time you got to the end of the season as well, irrespective of that trophy, that we need to make this decision? And then I suppose after that, what was your view of Thomas Frank as an appointment?
I mean, the funny thing is that, yeah, it definitely was, as you say, it was a real conflict of heart versus head with Ange Postecoglou. I'd actually sort of fallen out of love with him as a person after the season before when, we ended up losing to Manchester City at home, a game had we beaten them that would have handed Arsenal the title, all but handed Arsenal the title. And there was definitely a conflicted feeling around a lot of the Tottenham fan base, which I think there was an awful lot of pearl clutching about. There was an awful lot of this is why Spurs don't achieve stuff because they set their sights so low. They'd rather see themselves lose if it means that Arsenal don't win the league. But I think that was a complete not. I don't think it was a misunderstanding. I think it was a willful ignorance by lots of people to suggest that any fan base wouldn't be conflicted were they to win a dead rubber and it hands their greatest rivals the title.
Mm.
It's an unpleasant situation for any fan to be in,
Yeah.
and
And
having
Heung-min
Ange,
Son, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
Heung-min
right,
Son did not play
yeah,
as though like he was going to give the game to, or that he wanted, Spurs to throw the game. Like if he lifts it even slightly higher, right? Like you're talking about a
yeah.
completely different circumstance, right? So, but you were upset about how the collective reaction to that and Andrew's reaction to it as well.
Well, yeah, I was upset about the collective reaction, but Ange, in his post-match from that point, did take a bit of a swipe at the fans, essentially implied that the club's lack of success was, in part due to the fans and their outlook and things. And there's going to be a debate that rages about that type of thing. Whether he felt that or not, airing that type of thing publicly, throwing your fans under the bus is just it's just not what you do. It doesn't endear you to people. And there was just quite a few instances the following year of strange, confrontations between him and the fans and cupping his ears and all this type of stuff. There was a strange thing there that developed, and I was not particularly fond of him for that. The football itself really wasn't very good, as we've discussed, so that didn't help. But come the time that we ended up winning the Europa League, obviously the curse has been lifted. We finally got that. It's surreal. Like I say, it's surreal. Suddenly, a final whistle of a final goes, and it's Spurs who are out there celebrating. The ticker tapes up in the ground, the lily white shirts are there lifting a massive trophy up. You're like, hang on, I've been used to seeing this in FIFA or in my dreams in the
Yeah.
past few years. Not in real life. So, caught up in all of that. There's obviously the emotional sort of allure of saying, look, this is what he's achieved. He's given us this. He deserves another chance. But I think on an actual slightly rational level as well, there was a part of me that felt like, even if I don't particularly love the guy, even if we've had an awful season, I don't think it's great for the momentum of the club to, and it's a very hard proposition to sell, right? Sorry, Ange, you've won us our first trophy after 17 years, but we're giving you the heave ho. I didn't feel like it was a particularly wise move, even if, again, like I say, probably my more rational mind felt like it was probably the right move. Mickey van der Ven has obviously had an interview with a person I'm sure you adore, Gary Neville, in the past week. And he's sort of opened up a bit about Ange Postecoglou and his methods. And there's one of those parts that's come out where when it's kind of like people say from the mouths of babes, like when they say that like young like kids and stuff will reveal things in a sort of naive sense, not trying to be damning of something, but that's just what they do. And I feel like there's an air of that coming from this interview where he sort of talks about the fact that he, Romero, a few of the other senior players had to approach Ange Postecoglou at one point and say, the football isn't working, your approach isn't working. And then he sort of spins it as a positive in the respect that then we did adapt in places and it was a bit better. We really liked the football when it was good. Ange could deliver a speech and make us feel like we could beat anybody. But then when we didn't beat people, we didn't know how to respond to that. So to me, it speaks to the fact that the club probably were right to get rid of him. But then the appointment of Thomas Frank is, one that is very hard to be enthusiastic about, right? I think that's the thing. I will say I'm not going to revise history. I will say I wasn't against it when we did bring him in, but I wasn't over the moon about it. I wasn't buzzing. I could see it as the main thing it was sold to us on, and I guess the way we rationalised it as fans is we finished 17th last year. We couldn't win a game for love nor money. It looked like we were open season for anybody to beat. If we have to endure a couple of seasons of boring football, at least Frank will probably raise our floor, mean it will be a comfortable and solid top eight side. And maybe that's kind of what we need to do. Maybe we need to rebuild a bit after the damage that's been done, at least in the league season with Ange Postecoglou at the helm. But right now, it's hard to know. And I do think I've got to say I do think one thing I will say of Ange on a more negative note is I think that losing and throwing games got normalized to an alarming degree last year, a
Mm.
degree that I don't think it should do at a club like Tottenham. I think it's fine to say they were
You think
focusing.
the players throwing the games? Sorry.
I just think the directive that came from Ange Postecoglou, and it seems to be the way that it's been confirmed by Mickey van der Ven, is that the focus was entirely on the Europa League.
Yeah.
And I just don't think a club, look, whatever you want to say about it, whatever rival fans want to say, I still think a club the size of Tottenham Hotspur should be able to manage, and the money we spend, the resources afforded to us, the sort of squad we have, should be able to manage a cup campaign and a league campaign, at least a league campaign that doesn't see us finishing 17th. It's, it's a travesty, and I think we are still feeling. I see it. I see it now. I see it when things don't go our way in games, the heads drop and bad habits fall back
Yeah.
into the team. It's worrying. It worries me, mate. It does.
Yeah. I was thinking about, I mean, I think when I heard the news of the Frank appointment, what I was thinking, I suppose from an optimistic lens was, you think about the things that Postecoglou was accused of, or the downsides to his philosophy around football that kind of people highlighted, the lack of pragmatism. Obviously, in the end, the pragmatism ends up getting Spurs the European trophy that we're talking about, but it not being one that he believed in. It was a kind of a stopgap, and everything that you have read about Thomas Frank and the setup that he worked with, and was a man who, very detail focused, like lots of organization. Yes, maybe been some unique things about how they've approached set pieces and tried to play the percentages here and there as they had to, being a club the size of Brentford. Um, Smart recruitment, like recruitment that fit into place with kind of what the team was trying to achieve. And so I suppose I looked at that and looked at then the removal of Levy and thought, okay, this is something that can work here, because one thing I've seen prove the downfall of Spurs managers in the past, good managers who've come through the club, have been a perceived lack of backing or a lack of coherence from the footballing hierarchy above them, or have they really bought into the manager and what the manager's trying to do. So my hopeful stance from the outside was, okay, new manager, new structure, everyone, come on, let's get everybody buying in on the same page. And as almost as you mentioned there, maybe it will be rough and bumpy for a little bit, but that is the way out of this. You have to build from somewhere. Um, Tell me if you think, oh, that's all very nice and naive, but it's not worked out that way. If not Frank, it'd be interesting to sort of understand what type of profile of manager you were kind of more interested in sort of seeing after Postecoglou. And then I suppose my next question would be your reaction to that removal of Levy, right? Because so often the finger would be pointed between the manager and then Daniel Levy when things were going wrong. And I think rightly so. At many times, I think the criticism that was labelled and directed at Levy, I understood it. So, yeah, your thoughts on, I suppose, who else that you would have had kind of like better feeling for as a manager coming in this situation, and then yeah, your thoughts on the removal of such a long-standing figure in the club's modern history.
Well, yeah, I mean it's a difficult one, and it's one that I guess we're going to see play out in real time, because it's worth bearing in mind that the club have tried to have this rebrand. The club's owners have had to have this rebrand of ENIC, of which Daniel Levy was a constituent part of, to now the Lewis family. But ultimately, it's still the same people in
Same
charge.
people. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's the people who are Daniel Levy's bosses for the past 20 years, and the cynic in me says that fan sentiment has been turning against the board in the past few years. We've started to see not insignificant protests begin to happen outside the ground. I think it was last year. It might have been the tail end of the season before or last season. A march of several thousand down the high road. Thousands of fans who are, protesting against the club's ownership when previously it's been a handful of people here and there with a banner. So there was a significant, let's say, negative sentiment growing towards the board. They've gotten rid of Daniel Levy, obviously the figurehead of this. There's lots of speculation. There's lots of he fell out with this person, that person, he said, she said, but nobody really knows. Daniel Levy is off into the sunset with a decent pay packet, I would imagine, and the safe in the knowledge that he built this big shiny stadium for us, because that seemed to be where his priorities lie, or lied, I should say. Now with the Lewis family in charge, there's a lot of big talk. There's a lot of big talk that they want to spend money, that they want to see Spurs compete in a footballing sense or whatever. My concern is that they don't have the wherewithal to do that. There's, at the moment, a lot of people are likening it to, I don't know if you've ever seen the program Succession, but a lot of people are worried that, because it's Joe Lewis's kids essentially who are now running the club. Joe Lewis, who is the actual owner of Tottenham Hotspur, of ENIC, but has a complete hands-off approach, is in the Bahamas, hasn't put more than about, in 20 odd years, he has not put more than 20-30 million pounds of his own money into Tottenham Hotspur. Most of Tottenham's kind of spending has all been leveraged through various amounts of debts and loans and all this type of thing. Very, very, very. We've got one of the lowest owner spends in like the top however many leagues in Europe. It's really quite remarkable. But there's a lot of talk now that, to lift the glass ceiling, they've got to spend. And look, we've seen that. We know, look, I'm not saying this as a swipe at all, but I think at Liverpool now, you've readjusted your expectations. You did very well. You won the league under Jurgen Klopp, I would say, doing it the right way. But I think the reality has hit you. It's hit Arsenal, another club who I think are very similar to you in that respect, who, I think you both now realise, look, Manchester City are here, they're not going away. Chelsea are here, Villa spend a lot of money now, Newcastle are here, they spend a lot of money. It's great to have our principles, but if we want to stay competitive now, the name of the game is you have to spend a lot of money. You just have to. You have to roll with the punch, you have to, whatever. Opposition fans are going to say, checkbook this, checkbook that. But it's just the reality. If you want to stay competitive at the top end of football, you have to spend money now. That's the game. We're not immune from that. So this is the thing. Like if Spurs are going to in any way be successful, we have to spend lots of money. The problem is right now we are 6 years on now from Maurizio Pochettino, and in that time, we have seen the club continue to trend downwards. We've seen the club continue to not really have a proper strategy. We've gone from Jose Mourinho to Nuno Espirito Santo for 5 minutes, to Antonio Conte, over to Ryan Mason for a little bit, over to Ange Postecoglou, now to Thomas Frank. There's very, very little coherence between these managers. It doesn't speak to there being a grand vision at the club. It doesn't really speak to the club having any sense of what it is that it wants, how it wants to play, what's the vision here. You know, we often, and the thing is, what we tend to do is now we're in this era of just hiring suits from the City group. So we keep announcing this kind of major coup at Tottenham. They've signed insert name here, who is apparently a pivotal figure within the City group, blah, 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 blah. But it
Carlos
just,
Rafael Mawson, the latest of those guys, right?
Exactly. And it just feels like we've got this long line of people to push accountability onto. We don't really know what these people are doing. I mean, right now we have Johan Langer, we have Vinay Venkatesan, and we have Fabio Paratici, who is now back in the fold after being banned from the game for. I'm not going to say exactly what it is because I can't remember and I don't want to say anything libelous, but some sort of
He's back
behaviour. He's back. He's back at the club. Yeah, he's back at the club as pretty much as soon as his ban was lifted. Wow. So look, we've got all these people that are all apparently doing a job, but what that job seems to be is, I mean, it's unfair to say they're all opportunistic deals. Spurs have made a few good deals, a few good proactive deals down the past few years. I think Lucas Bergvall is a very talented young player. Archie Gray is a very talented young player. We've got this young lad called Vuskovic, who like a centre back who is currently on loan in the Bundesliga, Croatian. We signed him when he was about 15 years old. I still think he's only about 17, but by all accounts is going to be one of the finest centre backs in world football. Who knows? He's doing very, very well in the Bundesliga right now. So we've made a good few proactive deals, but then when we're talking about improving the first team, look, we're bringing in players like Richarlison, players like Solanke, who are the best way I can say this is like when we did sign Solanke, right? A friend of mine who's an Arsenal fan, and he's not really, he'll take the mick every now and again, but I can speak to him on a fairly sort of rational, decent level. And when we signed Solanke, he was just he put it to me this way: it's not a signing that worries me. It doesn't make me think Spurs are serious. It doesn't make me think Spurs are going to be breathing down our neck anytime soon. And I think that's just kind of what we do. These deals where there's not an awful lot of ambition there. We know we can get somebody like Solanke over the line for 65 mil, I think he cost us. We know we can get him on relatively low wages, 100 grand, 150 grand a week. What's that going to do? That's just a case of Spurs treading water. But again, where does Solanke fit within our vision? Where does Solanke play alongside Richarlison? How do those two fit together? And this is what I mean. Like we've just kind of cycled through a number of like okay players, which is quite hard to reconcile when you think a few years ago we had players like Toby Alderweireld, we had Jan Vertonghen, we had Moussa Dembele, we had Christian Eriksen, Dele Alli, Heung-min Son, Harry Kane, players that we just seemed to downgrade on. We didn't even make an attempt to replace them sufficiently. So, of course, it should come as no surprise right now that we're pretty awful. And it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot to get Spurs to a position where we're even a confidently, top half of the table side again, because you can see our form this year again. We're we're awful. We're there for the taking. It's really stark. I mean, look, in terms of Thomas Frank, fine. I thought he might add some stability to the club. I think that the problem is that, look, a lot of fans don't like his style of football. A lot of fans say it's not the Tottenham way and all this type of thing. Fine, I think that's a criticism that people can have, and they're totally entitled to their opinion on that. There's a part of me that, like I say, after the sort of Ange Postecoglou era, where I just wanted us to be a solid side. I wanted us to be all right. So if we had to endure a couple of years of it, fine, I could get through that. But the problem that you're seeing with Frank just sort of play out in real time, and it's probably quite similar to how it was with Potter at Chelsea, is that this is a manager that's come from a really functional ecosystem, like an ecosystem where the manager is one constituent part of an overall well-oiled machine, right? He is coming into Tottenham to be the figurehead of something. He's having to build that around him. And I just don't, he doesn't have the experience to do it. And I just don't think he has the gumption, for want of a better word. You'll know this, Harry, right? There are certain things that you want to see from a manager coming in, especially, supporting a club like Liverpool. You don't want your new manager to go into a press conference in one of his opening weeks and say, we have to set our expectations at a certain level. We can maybe hope to have 12 good games a season, then the rest we're going to have to fight for. This is something Thomas Frank said. And again, look, I'm sure you have your opinions about Spurs and where they lie in the pecking order, but I'm also sure you would probably say that Tottenham are an all right side and we can probably have aspirations a bit higher than that. But it's always with him, it's always just a case of managing expectations. There's never really this, we never really get that kind of thing from him, even if it's just playing for the cameras. Just give us every time we step on the football pitch, we want to win the game. Every single opponent we come up against, we feel we can beat them. And that's the atmosphere we want to create here, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff. It's never that. It's always, we might lose. There's going to be bad patches. It's not inspiring.
Yeah, it's the sort of stuff that I think, again, absolutely, if that's what you believe, absolutely fine. If that's what you're saying behind closed doors in private conversations with your coaching staff, like, look, it's gonna be tough. There's only a certain set of fixtures that I think we're guaranteed to win, or whatever. Yeah, saying it out loud when you're trying to inspire a fan base low on confidence, and a set of players who have gotten used to losing a lot is a really interesting choice to make. And to be honest, not one that I would have thought he would have made, actually, Thomas Frank. I think, when Klopp left, I remember there weren't very many shouts, but there were the odd few shouts of people who said, "Oh, Thomas Frank, he strikes me as a similar sort of character." And I was like, I see it in some ways, I don't see it in others, because again, I think one of the things that Klopp was so keen to emphasize during his time at Liverpool was, we go and we try and win this game. Like, and we might lose this game, but we're going to go out and try and win this game. We think we deserve to win this game. I was looking back at a quote from Hodgson, as you just mentioned. That quote from Thomas Frank. I think there was a quote from Hodgson around a draw against Everton at home, and that would be utopia or something like that. And these sorts of things that just never leave you as a manager if you're trying to ingratiate yourself to the fan base. So I'm surprised that you said that. It's actually been something that's come up with Liverpool this season in Arne Slot, who I think is a great communicator. He's also Dutch and very earnest, and at times I think a little bit too earnest. I mean, I watched Klopp lie with the best of them, because at times you have to lie, to not to your staff and your colleagues. I'm sure he's very honest with them, but to deal with 52 interviews a week, or whatever it is, as being a boss of a Premier League club, you're going to have to tell some fibs to avoid answering difficult questions, or keep the players on side, keep the fans on side. And one thing I think Slot's been guilty of this season, I think, is actually trying to answer questions earnestly and honestly at times, which has not been useful all the time, especially that stretch of the season that we had where he just basically outlined that we hadn't figured out a way to deal with a direct approach of football. And he wasn't moaning about that. He was just actually quite matter-of-factly saying, oh yeah, we've not figured this out, and it's becoming quite dangerous. So I think it's interesting what you say about your managers and the fit, and I almost think of it as most managers nowadays are used to working in fairly coherent, well-oiled systems. You know, a lot was made about Slot being the coach when he came to Liverpool and his appointment at Liverpool, and there's a hierarchy that works, and he's part of that, as opposed to maybe Klopp being a larger than life figure. Now I look at all the managers who you might look up as up and coming managers, and they're parts of pretty well-oiled systems, maybe Amarim with the exception of that, and I don't know where his stock is right now. So I almost struggle to think who you could bring in, who is that larger than life figure who is able to kind of own that role, rebuild it, be the figurehead of something. It's a challenge. And you mentioned that, just to go into sort of the players themselves, you mentioned a few of them who've come in. Vuskovic, who's obviously highly rated and a youngster and doing well. It's Dan So, Matthias Tell. The move gets made permanent. Mohamed Kudus, a player I like from West Ham. Xavi Simons, which seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, a pivot from, was it a pivot? Was that a pivot from Eze? You can tell me about that in terms of sort of like the identification of him as a player to sort of fulfill that kind of central creative role. And he's taking his time to adapt to the Premier League as well. You talked to me there about, yeah, good players. Is there much coherence? I suppose the question I'm asking you is, all things being right, what does a Thomas Frank Spurs side look like, or what do you think he wants Spurs to look like?
Well, I mean, his sort of, again, his sort of default position is let's not lose. And
It's not a bad
that's,
thing.
yeah, it's not, but I think that mentality bleeds through in a pretty negative way. It's
Mm,
seen as put in one of the, and I mean this honestly, I just about remember Spurs in the 90s when we were really bad. And I don't think I've seen many worse performances in a North London derby as we did this year against
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Arsenal, where we just didn't show up. It was just, and I know fans get very like, chest beaty about this stuff, but it's your biggest rivals, and to not put in any sort of performance is disgraceful. What's the point of football otherwise, really? It's not a job. It's not a job for fans. It's something that we're supposed to enjoy. It is part of the obligation of a manager, really, to entertain people. Um, again, mate. It's really hard to know because Thomas Frank varies his starting lineup so often. We saw for quite some time the centre of the pitch was occupied by Rodrigo Bentancur and João Palhinha. The sort of the double pivot of where footballing moves go to die. They don't seem to be able to pass a ball forwards, either of them, especially João Palhinha. Their primary function is to generally disrupt play. I mean, Rodrigo Bentancur was a fine footballer a few years back, but in that time he's had two pretty significant injuries, and that's apparent. That is all I would say. And you see that every time we play against a team like Newcastle with a big, dynamic, in-your-face midfield. He gets shown up. We played against Arsenal. Midfield gets completely shown up. There's Chelsea, another one. Caicedo was having a laugh. He was all over us. And I know, look, I get it. People say he will do that to a lot of teams. He's a £100 million footballer. So that is, of course, a consideration to have. But the fact of the matter is that, if Frank is playing football in this way, if we're sacrificing creativity, if we're sacrificing a clear attacking plan for a defensive minded setup, you at least want to see the side defending well. And we're still not managing to do that. There's a compilation doing the rounds at the moment. There have been some mate. There's a goal of the season against Spurs, fierce competition that is hotting up this season. You'll see it. There's a compilation of like banger after banger that's going in against Spurs, and a lot of this people say is down to the coaching. It's down to our lack of aggressive pressing. It's down to players being rooted to positions, players having this kind of firm zonal wedding baked into what it is that they're doing, whereby they're just terrified of, say, breaking ranks, of moving out of position, pressing anybody in our own half. And what you're seeing constantly is players outside of the box afforded so much time and space that it's no wonder that there's screamer after screamer. I've got my complaints about Julian and Vicario in goal, but the majority of these goals, no keeper on earth is saving, plenty of them anyway. So this is the problem. We did, as you say, we signed Xavi Simons. It seems like he is hesitant to really use him. He's started to play him in the last couple of games, and it's been to varying, to mixed effect. But I like him. I think he's a talented player. It is, of course, going to, you're seeing it yourself with Florian Wirtz. It's going to take some time to adapt to the physicality of a league, and I think a lot of people boil that down to he's a small guy, so that's the physical. That's him getting pushed around. He's not really getting pushed around. That's it. Time and space. Time on the ball. He just got to sort of. And he said this himself. He said this. It's just getting that kind of reflex. That reflex a bit sharper. So we are seeing good things from him, but it almost feels like Frank is looking for any excuse not to play him. By all accounts, Eza wasn't really high up on Frank's list either. Again, it feels like one of those things where, look, I'm not. Don't get me wrong, and obviously I'm annoyed about how that deal turned out and the manner of it all and everything, and the egg on the face for Tottenham, who he ended up going to, and everything. But again, it did feel like a somewhat opportunistic deal. It didn't. He didn't feel like a player that was what Spurs are crying out for. What Spurs have been crying out for a long time is a mobile six, a player that can disrupt but can play football, that can help start attacks for us. We don't, we've maybe got Lucas Bergvall that can do a bit of that, but he's more of a kind of number 8. We've maybe got Archie Gray who can do that, but again, we're talking about an 18 and a 19-year-old. Spurs need to have a sort of a senior player in there that can do that.
Was the last time that you had a player in that role that you think was of the required level, someone like Moussa Dembele? Was it even further back than that? I'm trying to think about, because he wasn't really an out-and-out destroyer anyway, but he could certainly progress the ball. But he progressed it more through dribbling, didn't he? More than actually necessarily being a passer. But I'm trying to think about who you've had in that role.
I mean,
Højbjerg.
He was. Oh, don't tell me about that, mate. But we did. I guess at that time we had, the likes of Christian Eriksen. We had the likes of Dele Alli who could drop back. He was, very box to box. The team just worked a lot better back then under Mauricio Pochettino, and obviously Mr. Dembele was a large part of that. Probably is back to him as the last. I mean, Mr. Dembele himself, though, as you say, he wasn't the best ball player. He was a fantastic player. I loved him, but he worked just very well within a system of decent, technically minded players, and I think that's one of those things that's severely lacking from Tottenham right now. We're seeing Archie Gray come in. I keep talking about him, but he's a highly rated youngster. Yeah, he's very talented. Look, he's going to make mistakes. He's a teenager. There's a bit of a debate as to who messed up during the week, whether it was Vicario or him. I tend to think it was probably more on Vicario, but Gray can still take some of the blame. But that's going to happen. Yeah, it's going to happen when you put a teenager into a team. They're learning on the job. That's fine. I don't think we need to crucify him for that. And one of the things that is quite stark, though, about him coming into the team is that people are lauding him in a positive sense, because he looks brilliant. He looks like he's got this really high technical floor. He receives the ball very nicely, very cleanly, recycles possession very well, always has his head up looking for good passes, and his technique on playing a pass is often very crisp. And it shows us, like, God, we don't have many players that are that have a very good technical foundation. Spurs have got a lot of decent players. We've got a lot of players that, if you took them out of Tottenham and put them into a system that suited their strengths, they'd probably look quite good. Mohamed Kudus has been very, very good for us. I dare say if you stuck him into Arsenal's team, he might look even better, And that's, Arsenal are a better team overall. But what I'm saying is that they have a more sort of well-rounded system. A lot of players are, all sort of interlock quite well. Spurs are a bit just all over the place. Because they have been, and it's indicative of the fact that they've been signed for a succession of different managers who want to play in different ways and require different strengths from their players. It's Oh God, I appreciate this is this is such a misery-a-thon for me from me today, mate. But it's look, I'll put my cards on the table with you, mate. I truly believe that if Tottenham don't get their act together, if they don't address a lot of the issues with our recruitment, with the way we, think bigger picture. And I'm not just talking about like we want to win the league, we want to win the Champions League. Yeah, great, that would be lovely. But I'm just talking about Spurs just operationally being more sound.
Mm.
I really think we could be a candidate for relegation. If we carry on in the trajectory we are, we could be a candidate for relegation within the next 2 or 3 years. Our downward trend is stark. We've trended downwards since Mauricio Pochettino has been in charge, and it has continued. It plummeted last year, but it's continuing. We've had a worse start to the season this year. This is the worst start Spurs have had to a season since the year we got under Juan de Ramos. We got 2 points from 8 games, and Harry Redknapp ended up coming in to save us. That's 2008. It's the worst start to a season we've had. And again, I'm sort of looking over my shoulder thinking, I'm thankful there's a few teams that are maybe a bit worse than us this year, but I think sooner or later our luck's going to run out. And I'm not saying this in a Tottenham victim mentality way or anything like that. I think it's the same for us, same for Manchester United. I think it would be the same for Liverpool if you found yourselves in this position. I think a lot of clubs in the league, if they get a whiff of blood, if they see there's the opportunity for one of the big ones to go down, everyone will pile in. Everyone will love it. It's like Leicester in reverse, right? And that's kind of what I worry about a bit with Spurs.
No, I think you're right. I think we've had a kind of I suppose a small glimpse of it this season with Liverpool, and that as you say, like I think whenever you see that a team has a vulnerability, and so we're talking purely tactically here. I mentioned about Arne Slot and a real direct, intense approach against Liverpool bearing fruit. Um, I don't know how many games into the season we are now, but we're here, and even though it's been like is it Liverpool 5 unbeaten at the moment, 3 wins, 2 draws. Um, that question's still not been answered around, but what will they do if a team adopts the approach that worked for those other teams at the start of the season? Have you figured that out? And what we saw whilst we were in the midst of that period was a pretty ruthless exploitation of that tactical blueprint against us. And you're right. I think that once one team understands that vulnerability, everybody else follows. And I think you're right to be concerned based on that trajectory that you mentioned there that has been fairly stark since. I I remember, I don't drag you back into, but I do remember the departure of Pochettino and the appointment of Mourinho, and speaking to, I think it was Savablour, who was at Tifo at the time, is at the Athletic at the moment, around that appointment, the logic behind that, or the lack of logic behind it. And it just feels since that point onwards, there's been less and less coherence about what's been taking place. Um, if you had to pick, and you mentioned the derby earlier on, and those can be unique games, and you were frustrated by just the complete lack of darbiness, I suppose, from Spurs in that game to approach it so tamely. Are there games this season that you could point to and say, if you've not been watching Spurs, if you've not really understood that we have had this worst start since 2008 under Juan de Ramos, you watch these 2 games and then you'll quickly understand kind of what our season's been about, both I suppose both the good and the bad. Are there fixtures for you that really stick out as exemplars?
I mean, I think the fact that we are one of Wolves' 2 points should speak for itself. This is quite clearly one of, if not the worst Premier League sides of all time, and we almost lost to them. We scored a 94th minute equaliser at home against Wolverhampton Wanderers, and didn't really bother them an awful lot. We've got one of the low. Mate, honestly, you could look at nearly any game we've played
Any
this
game. Okay.
season, and barring the exception of randomly we showed up against Everton, randomly we showed up
That's
against
fun.
Leeds,
That's well, that's fun.
but other than that, we don't create chances. It doesn't seem to be clear as to what we're trying to do to create chances, other than long throws and hoping we get corners. It's it's bizarre. It's really, really strange. It seems like a complete dereliction of duty from Thomas Frank and the coaching team. I do think some of that rests with the players. I don't think you can sit here and say, well, it didn't work under Angela, it's not working under this guy. It's the two managers' faults. But it all just, the players, the managers, it all feeds back to one place, and that's the people that run the football club. It's the lack of clarity, it's the lack of vision that we've had for many, many years. And maybe the Lewis children will change their ways. I'm cynical. I'm cynical at best about it. But yeah, mate, like, watch any game from Spurs. We're a shambles. We're a shambles. We don't. You'll come. I know you've had your problems this year. You'll comfortably beat us, and I think you'll be. I think Liverpool beating Spurs is not something that's new for you guys. So you can compare and contrast with the various other times that you've beaten us. But I do like to think that a lot of the time, at least, we give you a game. We've especially those years under Pochettino, Klopp, we had some good,
Really
some
games.
good battles down the years, right? Now it'll be meek. What did you do as last time? 6-1, 6-2, didn't you?
Well, yeah, in the
The
title game. Yeah.
Postecoglou game. No, the Postecoglou game last year, wasn't it? As
Oh, that was
well at
six
White Hart Lane.
six. I want to say 6-2. Can find out, but no,
He,
it
he should
was.
have got. He should have gone after that game. That's the
You
thing.
think? Okay,
That's what I mean. There was a rot like that where it just set in. Where there
6-3.
were yeah, there were plenty of times when you just see it and just think, how many are we going to concede here? What's going to happen? But this
Okay, so
year,
like,
I think it'll be the same. We won't lay a glove on you, mate. We won't. I can guarantee. I'm not just saying this as I'm a pessimist. From the way we've been playing football this year, we will not lay a glove on you. We won't. We don't create chances. We simply don't. It's bizarre, and it's really hard to quantify. Well, it's not. It's not. I don't want to have to quantify it. That's the problem.
is there not? I mean, I suppose again from every fan of their own team is always their biggest kind of like the harshest critic, and I suppose there are Liverpool fans who looking at Thomas Frank and thinking, well, maybe surely he recognizes this kind of like vulnerability from like a more direct approach that Liverpool have shown this season. Surely he has some ability of employing that approach with some of Tottenham's players and I don't know, trying to sort of play on that weakness. But I mean, let's get beyond the game in particular, actually, though, just because I think I've made you trawl over some very like some very sort of like sad stuff, and I kind of want to ask if I plucked one of the Lewis children off of the board and put you in their place, it sounds like from what you're saying to me that the foundation needs to be a coherent footballing like strategy for the next 5 to 10 years at least in terms of here's how we want to play. Here's what we want the identity of the club to be resoundingly to everybody outside in the world. Everybody we recruit is going to fit into this model from the coaches to the players to youth level. Do you think that is what is absent? That kind of wholesale plan as kind of what we are as a footballing institution? Do you think that's that like that's the best place to start, or do you think, or are you thinking in more kind of pragmatic short-term ways around? Let's get a six. Let's get a different kind of forward, and that will see us get better results, and we'll achieve more stability. I'm kind of asking where would you, or what would be your first move if you were looking to turn this around for Spurs?
Like you said, there needs to be a clear vision. It needs to be something for everybody at the club to
Yeah.
buy into. What is it that we're looking to achieve? Look, Arsenal did their All or Nothing documentary a year or so ago, and everyone took the piss out of them because Arteta walked around the training ground, and they had, all these hollow spaces on the wall, space for the Champions League trophy, space for the Premier League trophy. Everyone said, ha 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 ha, look at Arsenal. But he's giving people a vision to buy into.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
you know, I, I hope they don't, but they also look like a team that's capable of winning everything this season, which is terrifying to say. I'm not saying they will, but I think God forbid they win the Champions League, but I think they could at least. And that's because yep, they've spent a lot of money, and they are a club in London. They do have history and all this type of stuff. But let's not forget, again, until he sort of picked them up, they were a bit of a shambles. They were a bit all over the place. Now they look like a serious, credible team again. As good as they've been in a very long time, probably 15, 20 years almost. Like they're as good as they've been in that time. Spurs, all we've heard for 20 years under ENIC, under Daniel Levy's stewardship is going to be hard to compete. It's going to be hard to compete. Don't expect too much from us. It's going to be hard to compete. Every time we kind of got close to even being a halfway decent team, it would always be, you have to understand there's factors outside of our control. And we all get that. We all understand that. We all understand Manchester. Well, firstly, Chelsea came along, then Manchester City came along, right? Nobody's denying that these clubs don't spend an untold amount of money, have limitless amounts of money to spend. Chelsea perhaps not so much anymore with Abramovich gone, but they're still making a good job of pretending that they can. We get that, but what's the harm in, the club's motto is supposed to be to dare is to do. So why not just say, within 10 years' time, within 5 years' time, we want to win the Premier League, and these are the steps that we're going to take to do that. We've got this big stadium, we have an international fan base, we have money. What's to say we can't? Why does there always have to be a limit on our ambition? Now, this isn't to say that within 5 years Spurs are going to win the Premier League, but if you're at least bleeding this message down to everybody within the club, you can maybe start to feel some more positivity growing about the place. I just think right now, the way in which the club has operated for so long is going to take a lot of undoing. I'm cautious to say that, just hiring in some people from Manchester City here and there is the way that we're going to sort of, rectify that, because if they don't want to spend the money, if they don't want to spend the money wisely, if they don't want to accept the fact that if you want players that are going to draw fans back into the stadium, you're most likely going to have to pay them hundreds of thousands of pounds a week. Like we got fairly lucky with Kane and Son. It came at the same time for us. Kane through our academy, Son a Bundesliga signing, costs about £15 million. Don't think he was a very talented player, but I don't think anybody expected him to become the sort of player that he did, really, if anyone's being truthful about it. Not every single signing that you make is going to be one of those two, right? We get that, but you can't just keep clinging on and hoping that, we are going to somehow turn fairly average Premier League players into superstars, because that doesn't create any buzz. That doesn't fill up a stadium that is 66,000 seats, all of which you're hoping to charge people 70, 80 pounds to come and watch the club. It isn't going to work. You need to create positivity. You need to create a vision. You need to allow the fans, the players, everybody working at the club to believe in something, because right now I couldn't tell you what we are. I couldn't tell you what our ambition is. I couldn't tell you what it is that they're trying to achieve. What are we trying to achieve with Thomas Frank? Some stability.
Isn't there an argument? I mean, sorry to interrupt there, but isn't there an argument that you look at the clubs that often get pointed to? Brentford's one of them, right? And again, you can sort of talk about the drastic difference in size between, Brentford and Tottenham, and Brighton and Tottenham, and Bournemouth and Tottenham. But if we speak about some of those clubs that are viewed, I think anyway, as they're really well run, and they have to be well run to be in the Premier League and to be doing what they're doing. Or you look at the way in which kind of Bournemouth play at times, or you look at the way in which some of these players from those teams then get plucked by other teams, for 40, 50 million pounds. Isn't there an argument to be made that like it is? I mean, I'm not saying you're going to sign another Heung-min Son for 15 million pounds from the Bundesliga, but isn't there an argument to be made that you whilst you have to spend money, absolutely. And again, as a Liverpool fan, after this window, it feels difficult to say this, but this window for Liverpool was an incredibly different one from anyone I've necessarily seen. Yes, we spent with Virgil and Alisson back in the day, but that was really reinvesting the Coutinho money after Neymar, began this distortion of kind of transfer like spend. Isn't there an argument that looking at those teams shows that you do not have to sign superstars. Well, not well-known superstars. You can sign players who, with the foundation in place and a good coach, can quickly become stars that fill seats, that fill stadiums, that people come and want to watch their team play. Like like a complete mind experiment. Like if Spurs played like Bournemouth play, even this season with kind of a leaky defense and they don't look as sure-footed as they did last season, I'm imagining that those seats would be filled, right? People would be excited to see their team come and play. They understand what the manager's trying to do. And there's not necessarily, yeah, there's Semenyo, there's a couple other people, but there's not necessarily, a superstar. I know that I'm asking you to compare a club that's incredibly different in size to Spurs, but I'm just trying to make the point that like is the easiest move here to actually that superstar to be the manager, like to be that inspiring figure, than it is to necessarily go and spend 100 million pounds on a player and then expect them to be the driving force. I'm kind of yes, I'm just interested in sort of that your view on that, and then we'll look to wrap things up because I know we've been going for a while.
Yeah, I mean, look, there is definitely something in that, but as you say yourself, you touched on it, the level
Size.
of club, the size of the club, it warps expectations, not just from within the sort of performance level that a Bournemouth or a Brighton or somebody can get away with
Yeah, true.
it's not going to be something that's going to be afforded to, that you're not going to have like a 10, 15-minute piece on Monday Night Football from Carragher and Neville talking about Bournemouth or Brighton after a ropey performance away at St James's Park. That's a sort of privilege that isn't afforded to Spurs.
Are they a good example then? Newcastle. I mean, again, unlimited money buckets that we're not going to talk about, but where they built from, and I suppose how they did. I suppose they did get Gimenez. I suppose they did get Isak. They had a couple who became those superstars, but they weren't necessarily household names when they signed them. But there was coherence, I suppose. So I'm just trying to find a club that I think is a better comparison.
I get what you mean, but then I would say, look at the way sort of both of the clubs have spoken about. Spurs and Newcastle sit on exactly the same points this season. We've had the same season.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Newcastle have been spoken about in as negative of as terms as Tottenham. And look, this isn't just some sort of, again, this isn't some Spurs fan victim mentality stuff, and this isn't some Spurs fan getting ideas above his station. But I just think we are, we sort of set the bar for ourselves a few years back that we are a club of certain repute. And I think, look, maybe that's a learning for everybody. Maybe we're sort of learning now that, look, Aston Villa were a club that were a complete blip on our radar. Look, when we were playing you in the Champions League final, we weren't thinking about Aston Villa. Do you know what I mean? Let's put it that way. And now, I don't know if you saw Daniel Story's the Premier League since Amorim has been in charge table. Have you seen that doing the rounds? Yes. Spurs are 16th on that. We have half the points of Aston Villa. We have 30 less points than Crystal Palace. I think it's 40. I think it's the last 44 games or something like that. I think that's how long Amorim's been in charge of United. So look, maybe we need to readjust our expectations, and that's something that I think will come quite naturally. We had a little peak under Harry Redknapp for a few years, the Gareth Bale, Luka Modric team, when Spurs looked like they might be a semi-serious side for a while. We had a couple of good runs in the Champions League. We had an all right sort of run in the Premier League, things like that. And then that fell off and we had a couple of wilderness years again until Kane, Son and Eriksen, all that lot came along again. So it might just be a period of that. It might just be a period of Spurs having a few years in the wilderness and, maybe in time Bergvall, Gray, whoever, Mattis Tell. Some of these players come good. Some of these players are the superstars of tomorrow for us. That's great. It does feel a little bit though, like you say, football's constantly evolving, isn't it? It's always changing, and it just feels like right now we're in this like hyper capitalist kind of,
Yeah.
to another degree now with football, where it's it's actually quite off-putting. I find, like, genuinely speaking, I
Mhm.
do. I'm not just saying this because Spurs are not very good or anything. I do find myself more and more now thinking, God, what is going on? What has actually happened here? And I see it myself. There's these parts of me when I'm just like, look, forget it. I like sell Spurs. Don't care who the owners are. Just come and spend money for us. Whatever. Football's morally vague anyway. If they've got human rights atrocities on their thing, or their US oil companies, or this whatever, get them in. Let's just be one of them. Let's be one of the baddies, and let's spend loads of money. And then I sort of think, that's quite rank, isn't it? Really,
Mm.
it's really quite unpleasant that your intrusive thoughts are even going that way. But it's kind of it's where the sort of sports going to, in a way. Look, we're seeing a lot of stuff around the World Cup that's on the horizon.
Ah, awful.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's something we all have to reconcile, right? Look, but it's not to say there aren't deep human connections that are still made within the game. The game is still a real good force for good. I'm not a complete nihilist about it. I think there are some really good. Football is an amazing platform to do some really good things, and I still think it does some really good things despite all the terrible things attributed to it. So I don't completely have this, like I say, this negative outlook on the sport itself. To your point, sorry, I know I'm meandering about it, but like, to your point about whether we can build, yeah, I mean, maybe we can. I'm hoping that we can. It does feel like we just need we need some to sign some players with vision. I'm not sort of sat here desperately hoping that Spurs will sign £100 million players all the time. It would be nice if we could, but we just need to look like we're buying players that are going to fit together, that are all on the same page, that are, that are, I don't know, that are good. There you go. Some good players, some players that can actually play football. That'd be
Mm.
nice. Because, yeah, I think it's just you reminded me of the name Pierre Mahoybier that's rattled me here. Um,
I'm so sorry. Yeah,
that's all
it's
right, mate.
no, yeah, it does feel as though the Spurs are lacking a figurehead, like somebody off the pitch in the dugout that is capable of, yeah, unifying people and driving towards like a, yeah, collective goal. And that doesn't, yeah, that we could talk about Klopp and what he was able to achieve at Liverpool, but that doesn't happen, without the infrastructure that he ultimately walked into and worked with. And those figures don't exist on their own anymore, right? So I think you're right to point the finger towards where is this overarching structure and plan that somebody can then slot into as a cog and do their bit, and they don't have to do everything. They just do their bit, and then a good left winger comes in, and doesn't have to be Maradona. They just do good left winger things, and that makes the side immeasurably better. I think it's breaking down the problem into those more manageable chunks. Only comes from that overarching vision being there. And I suppose I'm not going to ask you about the game itself because I mean you've already jumped to that and sort of, I'm sure, made a lot of Liverpool listeners like more at ease. I mean, this season we're still sort of strangely not at ease, and also I think um, I think you spoke about money there. I think in the wake of Jota's passing as well, this season the whole thing kind of feels meh to to me at times, and I'm sure that the players have a hard time thinking like that as well. So yeah, football's, I think it's been a quite strange year to go from, yeah, where things have been at some stage to sort of where it feels like they are right now. Um, I suppose any final thoughts or expectations like for the season, if you could bite off a position or an achievement right now for this campaign, what would it be?
I mean, right now, I want to see Spurs stay away from the bottom half of the table. Be nice to see us have a top half finish. I mean, look, really, I think we have a team that should be capable of finishing in the top eight. So that would be something that'd be nice to aim for. It'd be nice to see Thomas Frank being able to at least get some level of consistency. Start to play all right. Start to at least have some sort of attacking plan. And I appreciate I've been sort of quite dour on this pod, Harry. So I
It's
apologise for
okay.
that. But I do just want to say that, like, outside of as you say, kind of every fan thinks their own club is not going to be any good and all that type of thing. I don't just mean this for dramatic effect. I will be staggered if we lay a glove on you on the weekend. I would like it's we are we're these past 2 seasons we are as bad as I've ever seen us but it's remarkable. I think other people are starting to catch up with it now, like people outside of Spurs.
Mm.
But it's not just, oh god, we're useless, aren't we? No, we actually are useless. Like we're really really bad. We're talking about a side that barely manages to muster shots on target. It's really really stark. So um you know, have fun. One of us will, mate. It will highly unlikely be Tottenham because But I mean, how fitting would it be? How fitting would it be that when we're in one of our lowest moments, that's when we end up beating Liverpool? It's never when we're actually any good, is it? Like never when we feel like we can go toe to toe with you. No, 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 no. So that would
Mm.
be quite damning. But mate, I wouldn't bank on it. So
Okay.
just hope. My fear is, mate, for your side, is that you end up beating us, you end up giving us a 4-5 nil thrashing.
People
You
think
get
that
all
we're suddenly, yeah.
you get all the headlines. Liverpool have turned a corner. That's it. They've put the Salah thing behind them, and then you go and lose to Wolves the week after. So
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, I mean that question around can Liverpool deal with the approach that Nottingham Forest took or other sides took at the start of the season, that was the way to beat us, our kryptonite. There's still not been a game where we've seen recently we've had to deal with that since we tried to change structure, change positions, and we'll have to see. I don't think, yeah, I think if Liverpool do win this weekend, I'm sure there will be stuff made about it. Unbeaten in six. They're on a run. Have they turned a corner? I'm yet to fully believe it, but we'll have to wait and see. But Jack, I want to thank you for coming on and yeah, airing all your thoughts on Spurs. And I know we
mate,
joke
thank
at
you. It's
times.
been like therapy for me. So thanks. I
Yeah,
can't
no,
do
we
this. I
do.
can't do this on my Spurs pods because they'll all stop listening and say I'm being too negative.
Yeah, and also as somebody who's like, who's done therapy in the past, whenever I brought up football, I always felt kind of slightly strange to do so, to be honest. Like I remember when Klopp left, happy to admit it, definitely brought it up in a sort of strange way in a therapy session about, yeah, this kind of weird father figure's kind of left, but he's not my dad, he's a football manager. And I could sort of see the therapist and I was like, okay, I won't do this again because I could see them sort of looking. But so yeah, so at least we do have this yeah, this kind of vehicle to sort of yeah, have this catharsis. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. And hopefully
Thank
by
you,
the
mate.
next time I speak to you, yeah, you'll have reasons to be in a more optimistic mood.
Fantastic. Cheers, mate.